While you may not think Weezing and Dugtrio have much in common other than being Gen 1 Pokemon, there is a deep corner of the Pokedex that most people just gloss over. But today, I'm gonna give it some deserved love. I mean, just look at these little guys. Pokedex shapes were introduced to the mix all the way back in Gen 4, but starting in Gen 6, Game Freak decided to give these little guys some life. I've always really been intrigued by one of these categories specifically, the Pokemon with multiple bodies classification. The deeper you think about it, the more confusing it gets. And today that's what we're doing in Pokedex order. Then we'll talk about some Pokemon that somehow aren't listed as multiple bodies, but definitely should be. So be sure to stick around for the end of the video. So there are jokes about Diglett everywhere. We've all seen the memes, and the Pokemon Company has never officially revealed what the underside of a Diglett looks like. Even weirder, however, is Dugtrio, our first Pokemon in Dex order classified as having multiple bodies. Now, there's essentially two options, and I'm not sure which is worse to think about. Either we're talking about 3 individual Diglett that stay together forever after undergoing evolution, or we're talking about one entity that grows 3 Diglett heads, Cerberus style. It has been said, and as M&J TV pointed out in his 2014 video, that Diglett does in fact have feet. It's just never been shown what they look like, so I'm gonna go with the 3 separate Diglett theory. And speaking of 3 separate Pokemon coming together to make one, next we have Magneton, the magnet Pokemon. This guy is very clearly 3 Magneton put together, linked by a strong magnetic force. It is said in various Pokedex entries that this magnetic force is quite strong, being able to cause earaches if you get too close, disrupting radio waves, disrupting electronics, and drying moisture. It's said that this evolution in strong magnetic force happens when sunspots flare up. What's interesting to me so far is that there has been a pretty clear distinction that the multiple bodies Pokemon shape is representative of a few individual Pokemon put together. Let's see if that holds up. Well, that didn't last long. Next up, we have Exeggcute. Surprisingly enough, or not, is that one single egg of an Exeggcute is not its own Pokemon. 6 individual eggs make up one Exeggcute, which makes it a pretty unique entry to the multiple bodies group. I suppose the psychic typing helps this one make more sense, as the eggs are said to communicate telepathically as one being. One specific Dex entry I find interesting is the Ultra Sun Pokedex that states, should one of the 6 be lost, the next morning there will once more be 6. And the Sword Dex entry states, though it may look like it's just a bunch of eggs, it is a proper Pokemon. Even the Dex is trying to justify this guy not having a pre-evolution. Moving on, to wrap up Gen 1, we've got Weezing, and I suppose Galarian Weezing can count here too. It's stated pretty clearly in multiple Dex entries that Weezing is 2 Koffing fused together. Like in its Pokemon Red entry, which says, where 2 kinds of poison gases meet, 2 Koffing can fuse into a Weezing over many years. Or like its Pokemon Gold entry, which says, if one of the twin Koffing inflates, the other one deflates. It constantly mixes its poisonous gases. It would be cool if in future games, Weezing would be given the Dunsparce treatment. The Dunsparce can be found in a 2-segment and a 3-segment form, and there is precedent for this with Weezing. Its Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, Black, and White Dex entry states, it grows by feeding on gases released by garbage. Though very rare, triplets have been found. At the time of recording this video, we don't have another Legends ZA trailer or release, so Game Freak, give us Mega Weezing with 3 heads, or literally just repeat the 3-segment or mousehold type thing, but with Weezing. That'd be sick. Honestly, in my opinion, it was a missed opportunity to not do that in the Teal Mask DLC. That would have been the best Easter egg in the whole DLC. Just randomly give this Gen 1 Pokemon a 3-headed form and tell no one. And with that, we're actually skipping over Gen 2, as there are no Pokemon given the multiple bodies distinction in the whole region. However, make sure to stick around to the end of the video because I'm going to bring up some honorable mentions that could have fit in here. But moving on to Gen 3, at first glance, it may not seem like any of these Pokemon would fit into the group of Pokemon with multiple bodies. However, Metagross is the sole Gen 3 Pokemon with the honor. It's said in many Pokedex entries that Metagross has 4 brains, as the result of 2 Metang each having 2 brains mixed together, implying a single Beldum has 1 brain, and are all coming together to make up this one Metagross. Oddly enough, Metang is also stated in Pokedex entries to be 2 Beldum fused together, even mentioning that it has 2 brains, consistent with what we went over for Metagross. However, Game Freak did not keep that same energy when giving Metang its shape classification. Instead, Metang was listed as a Pokemon with head and multiple arms shape. Back to Metagross though, it kind of makes me wish we got an 8 Beldum monstrosity as the Mega evolution instead of just the normal Mega. Or perhaps a Gigantamax form that's like 1,000 Beldum put together or something like that. It should be noted, however, that Mega Metagross is different. Where Metagross has 2 Metang put together, the Pokemon Sun Dex entry for Mega Metagross states that a Mega Metagross is actually 1 Metagross, 1 Metang, and 2 Beldum, making it a total of 8 Beldum, or 2 Metagross put together. Now moving on to Gen 4, we've got 3 fun ones. Starting off with Combee, the tiny bee Pokemon. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl come out firing by making this one confusing. First, Diamond says that 3 other Pokemon come together to make Combee. Does this mean that a pre-evolution could exist, or there is another Pokemon that comes together to make this Combee, like a Beldum makes a Metang or Diglett makes a Dugtrio? Well, pump the brakes for a second, because Platinum's Dex entry says that this trio is together from birth, implying that it really is a single Pokemon the whole time. This is contradictory, and the Dex entries are from the same generation. Pokemon Sword then later takes a middle ground and simply says that the trio spends all their time together. While Combee is pretty unclear, Cherubi, our next entry, is pretty weird, but also pretty cute. There are multiple Dex entries for Cherubi mentioning how it stores nutrients in its small ball. What a freaking cute name for this little guy. But in Legends Arceus, we get our first look into a potential deeper tie between the two. It's Dex saying, once the fruit growing alongside the main body is large and plump, Cherubi will use the nutrients within to evolve. The fruit then detaches, becoming nourishment for other creatures. So apparently, to evolve into a Cherum, the small ball needs to grow enough to provide enough energy to Cherubi to then say, I've had enough of you, drop the small ball, become a Cherum. Then the small ball gets eaten by a bunch of other things. And apparently in all that time, it doesn't count as a Pokemon. Whatever. Next up, and probably best shown by this specific Pokemon card from 2016, Probopass is classified as having multiple bodies due to its control over what the Pokedex calls its 3 mini noses. I'm gonna be honest, of all the Pokemon on this list, I think these little things might be the ones I wish were real Pokemon the most. Imagine a baby pre-evolution of Nosepass, and it's just one of these little guys. As of the end of Gen 9, we've yet to see a normal rock type, so Game Freak, please give us the mini noses as normal rock type Pokemon. Please. So I'm sure Game Freak knew the Pokemon fandom would complain about there being an ice cream cone Pokemon. And then they said, well, yeah, I suppose 2 ice cream cones count as multiple bodies.
Prepare for trouble!
Make it double!
Vanillux, the snowstorm Pokemon in its Pokemon Sun entry, is referenced to have a brain in each of its heads. However, one confusing tidbit in the Moon entry, of course the same gen, is that if it loses one of its heads, it can live relatively problem-free. But wouldn't that just kind of devolve it? That opens up a whole nother can of worms that I don't really want to think about, to be honest. In Pokemon Shield, they made it clear that even the Pokemon universe doesn't really know what the line is here. As it says, people believe this Pokemon formed when 2 Vanillish are stuck together. No real clarity on this one. But now we revisit Magneton for a second, as we get somewhat of a callback to it in the form of the Gear Pokemon. Clink, Clang, and Kling are all classified as Pokemon with multiple bodies, giving us our first evolution line to each have Pokemon of that specific shape. For Clink, we have a nice little codependency going on here. They both need the constant turning to have enough energy to survive. There is no mention in the Pokedex of this being 2 individual gear Pokemon, and this is further supported by its design. I never looked closely at it, but Clink actually has 1 eye on each gear. So unlike Magneton, it looks like we're truly looking at one organism made up of multiple parts. Unless of course you consider the black circles or the white X's to be the other eyes of each individual gear. I don't know. In the case of Clang, we do lose an eye, but we gain a whole bunch of other parts. Black and White 2 show that we have another codependent relationship, going as far to say that the Pokemon will die if it loses one of its part. Once again, not much mention, however, on whether or not these entities are individual or not. If they are, we could assume we're working with 1 small and 1 large gear. So interestingly enough, perhaps Clink equals small gear and Clang equals large gear. But that would mean that Clang should have been called Kling Clang, and the third evolution should have been called something else? Then what Pokemon would Clang be? A non-existent version that's just the large gear on its own? I'm not sure. I'm just a little confused now. Let's move on to the final evolution, which is simply a Clang with an added red core, as said in multiple dex entries. Everything was all fine and dandy until Pokemon Shield, however, when Game Freak threw a little bit of a wrench in what was going on with this multiple bodies thing for the Clink line. They went out of their way to make sure we knew that the new spiked gear wasn't a living creature, implying that the rest of the parts of our Clink Clang are individually. Galaxy brain levels of biology are needed to figure this one out. Way above me. Hey guys, remember I'm a small YouTuber and I'm really passionate about continuing to make these videos. So if you like my content, leaving a like, comment, and sub on this video would help me more than you know. I still don't really know what my niche is or what kind of videos I'm going to continue to make. So knowing what types of videos you guys like is really helpful. And I appreciate any of you who keep coming back for my videos so far. On to Gen 6, and continuing our multiple body steel type trend, we have Doublade, which seems to clearly be the combination of two Honedge. However, this is not quite the case here. Doublade is said to come from a single Honedge splitting into two. It's not really stated anywhere, so I wonder if these dual swords are truly a shared consciousness or separate organisms. And while we're at it, that raises the question, are the Sword and Shield of Aegislash not multiple bodies? Apparently not, as this Pokemon was given the Pokemon consisting of a head and base shape. And to round out Gen 6, we have a Pokemon I totally would have forgotten to put on this list. If you were to ask me to draw a picture of Binacle, the two-handed Pokemon, I would definitely not have given each set of hands two eyes, as I thought this guy was just one Pokemon. However, it's not, it's two. And even crazier, Pokemon X clears this up right away with its dex entry. Apparently, one Binacle is one hand, yet the Pokemon Binacle is also the rock with the two Binacle in it. I suppose this works because the plural of Binacle could be Binacle, but we do have a bit of multiple bodies confusion here. Let's take a look at Barbaracle and see if that clears anything up. Well, maybe this is why I would have illustrated it differently. Clearly, each of Barbaracle's arms has one eye in the middle, not two, making them not Binacles, right? Well, apparently that's not right. These are one-eyed Binacle. In Pokemon X, we learned that Barbaracle is actually 7 Binacle, meaning 6 of these Binacle make up the one-eyed Binacle of Barbaracle's 4 arms and 2 legs, and then we're left with one two-eyed, but also different-looking, Binacle as the head of the pack. It even says in Pokemon Y that the Binacle can think and act independently, but it seems like the head Binacle has a little more intelligence and all control over the others. Moving on to Gen 7 in the Alola region, we have one of my favorite Pokemon with multiple bodies, and one that makes complete sense for once. While Wishiwashi's solo form is classified as a Pokemon with fins shape, Wishiwashi's school form is made up of a bunch of Wishiwashi coming together to make a formidable beast, and its shape changes in the dex to our multiple bodies group. No hive mind is implied here, as it really does seem like a bunch of individual Wishiwashi working together to form the Demon of the Sea, apparently capable of turning a bunch of little water guns into a Hydro Pump. But it does learn Hydro Pump at level 44, so what would a bunch of Wishiwashis in school form using Hydro Pump at the same time look like? Gen 7 only had one Pokemon with multiple bodies, and so does Gen 8. That would be the formation Pokemon, Phalanx. This Pokemon is a bit of a gray area in the deck. Due to it being fairly new, our little militaristic sausage man doesn't give us much data to work. All Shield's dex entry gives us is that 6 of them work together as one Pokemon. So what does them imply? To me, it means that there would be potential for them to function on their own, right? So if one gets split up, what happens? Is one segment not worthy of being a Pokemon? What else would it be in universe? This would be fun potential for a baby Pokemon at some point, I guess. However, the Pokemon Sword, as well as the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet dex entries, give us a deeper look into the brass of the group, which is the leader of the 6. To me, it would be cool if we had a baby pre-evolution of Phalanx that had 2 different forms. One could be a brass, capable of evolving into Phalanx, and the others could be unable to evolve. So finally, we arrive at Paldea, Our first example leaves us a bit confused at what would happen if there were only one, but the cuteness makes up for it. Tandemaus, the couple Pokemon, is said to always stick together, meaning we don't really have to worry about classifying as an individual. Then there's also Maushold, also consisting of multiple bodies, as Tandemaus's evolution, which can come in a family of 3 or a family of 4 form, with the family of 3 being only a 1 in 100 chance to find upon evolution. Tandemaus is listed as a gender unknown Pokemon, perhaps due to Game Freak not being able to list the couple Pokemon as one male, one female, which it seems to be, since Tandemaus reproduces on evolution to make Maushold the family Pokemon, right? Well, not really. Pokemon Scarlet's Dex entry does state that it is not clear that this family of 4 Maushold are a parent-to-children relationship. And in Pokemon Violet, it's stated that it's unclear where the extra mouse comes from, yet they all live together like a family. Now we reach our final 2 Pokemon for this list, and some of my favorite new evolutions of all time. While Applin is said to be 1 worm inhabiting an apple, Diplin is 2 worms working cohesively. Now this does bring up one question. There are worms in the Pokemon universe? If that's one of the bodies, then what exactly would the worm be without the other? Or worse, while not inhabiting an apple, would it be its own Pokemon? Well, we have some kind of idea what happens to them, at least, with the Dex entries of Hydrapple, the Apple Hydra Pokemon, telling us that these worms eventually become dragon serpents? That's such a good pun. Well, Hydrapple is made up of 7 of these worm-like serpents, which is crazy because we just about to cram 5 more of these worms into a Diplin and evolve every one of the 7 into larger serpent-like creatures. Well, how did we do? We still have a few more Pokemon to talk about, which are my odd exemptions from the National Pokedex. I just feel like some of these Pokemon could have been given the multiple bodies distinction. Come on. First up, if Kangaskhan isn't a Pokemon with multiple bodies, then I don't know what it is. I suppose with its initial Gen 1 design, it's inconclusive on whether or not the little one is attached to Mama, but the Mega Evolution settles this. This little one is its own thing. Why Kangaskhan did not get a baby evolution, and why this cute little guy does not have a name yet, I will never know. We may never know, but I want it to happen. A little more inconclusive and up for debate, and I don't hear enough people talk about this, but Wobbuffet? What is it? I don't really know what Wobbuffet is. There are 2 sets of eyes here. The ones that always seem to be closed on its head, or are those just black markings? But then Wobbuffet's eyes are on its tail? There are many Pokedex entries for Wobbuffet detailing its tail and the way it's very defensive of it, but nowhere in any Dex entry for the patient Pokemon does it say whether or not the tail is sentient or if the Pokemon is made of multiple organisms. I will, however, cut Wobbuffet some slack, as it's the one Pokemon that perfectly matches its shape silhouette in the Pokedex. I mean, look at this. Game Freak, make this Wobbuffet shiny, come on. And then, our last one for today, and we'll end sort of where we started. If Dugtrio is a multiple bodies Pokemon, then why wouldn't Wugtrio get the same treatment? Wugtrio is the most egregious snub of this whole list, as Scarlet's Pokedex entry literally uses the plural bodies when describing Wugtrio. Absolutely disgraceful, and this better get fixed in later generations. Anyhow, did I forget anyone? I'm sure with over 1,000 Pokemon, there are some that could fit this classification that I glossed over in my research that Game Freak clearly left out. If you think of one, definitely leave a comment below and let me know if you like these kinds of shape videos, or just leave a fun Pokemon fact of your own and I may highlight you in another video. Slak Squad out.